Close your eyes for a second and imagine this. It is the year 120. You're walking down a marble street in Rome. The air smells like fresh bred olive oil and maybe a little bit of horse. Above you, towering columns. Ahead of you, the Colosseum rising like something out of a dream. Crowds cheering, fountains flowing, gold glinting in the sun. Now here is the wild part. At this moment, Rome controls nearly 2 million square miles of land. Around 60 to 70 million people live under its rule. That is roughly 1/4 of the world's population at the time, according to historian Walter Scheidel. One city, one empire, one unstoppable machine. But here is the question that keeps historians up at night. How does something that big fall? Before we step deeper into this story, if you enjoy slow immersive history, told like a late-night conversation, go ahead and gently tap that subscribe button. Give this video a like if it earns it. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Are you in New York, Texas? Somewhere quiet at 2 in the morning with a cup of coffee? I read your comments more than you think. Now take a breath. Maybe dim the lights a little. Let us walk into ancient Rome together. At its peak, Rome did not just conquer land. It conquered imagination. By the 2nd century under Emperor Trajan, the empire stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. Roman roads ran for more than 250,000 miles. 250,000. That is enough to circle the earth 10 times. And these were not dusty trails. They were engineered with layers of stone so solid that some are still visible today. Aqueducts carried millions of gallons of fresh water into cities every single day. The Aqua Claudia alone supplied enough water to support baths, fountains, and private homes. In fact, historian Frontinus recorded that Rome had 11 major aqueduct systems by the end of the 1st century. And speaking of baths, Romans did not just bathe. They socialized. They negotiated business deals. They gossiped. Imagine a spa the size of a shopping mall filled with heated pools, libraries, gardens, and artwork. The baths of Caracalla could hold around 1,600 people at once. Luxury was not hidden in Rome, it was public, loud, proud. But here is something we often forget. Behind the marble and the mosaics were real people. A soldier stationed on the cold frontiers of Britain. A merchant praying his ship would survive a storm in the Mediterranean. An enslaved worker maintaining the roads that everyone else admired. Rome was not built by emperors alone. It was built by discipline, by organisation, by an almost stubborn belief in order. The Roman army, for example, was not just brave, it was structured. A legion had about 5,000 soldiers divided into smaller units with clear chains of command. Training was relentless. A recruit was expected to march 20 miles in full gear, carrying equipment that could weigh over 40 pounds. No gym membership required. This system created stability. Stability created wealth. And wealth created, well, everything you just imagined. But here is where the story starts to shift. Because when a civilization becomes used to comfort, when marble replaces mud and applause replaces anxiety, something subtle begins to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, just slowly. And that quiet shift, that is where we're heading next. Now here is where the story gets a little uncomfortable. Because while Rome looked invincible on the outside, something inside was quietly shifting. Let us zoom in not on the emperors, not on the marble buildings, but on the money. By the 3rd century, Rome had a serious cash problem. And when empires run low on money, they get creative. Sometimes too creative. The Roman silver coin, the denarius, had once been nearly pure silver. But over time, emperors began reducing the silver content to stretch their resources. Under Emperor Nero, around the year 64, the silver purity dropped slightly. By the mid-3rd century, during the reign of Emperor Gallienus, the coin contained less than 5% silver. Less than 5%. According to economic historian Kevin Butcher, this massive debasement triggered severe inflation across the empire. Imagine opening your wallet and realizing your dollar bill is now mostly paper, with just a sprinkle of value left. Prices skyrocketed. Trust in currency collapsed. Soldiers demanded higher pay. Farmers struggled to survive. And when the army's unhappy in Rome, that is never a small problem. Between the year 235 and 284, Rome went through what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. More than 20 emperors claimed the throne in less than 50 years. Most of them didn't retire peacefully. Many were assassinated by their own troops. Just pause for a second. How do you build long-term stability when leadership changes that often? How do you plan for the future when tomorrow's emperor might not survive the week? The historian Cassius Dio once wrote, "We have fallen into a state where we must pay for being ruled." And you can almost hear the frustration in that line. Taxes increased. Small farmers abandoned their land because they could not afford the burden. Large estates swallowed up the countryside. The gap between rich and poor widened. Does that sound familiar at all? And yet Rome did not collapse right there. That is the fascinating part. It adapted. Emperor Diocletian eventually stepped in around the year 284 and tried to stabilise the chaos. He reorganised the empire-divided administrative power and even issued the edict on maximum prices in the year 301 to fight inflation. It was one of the earliest attempts in history to legally cap prices across an entire empire. Did it work perfectly? Not really, but it showed something important. Rome was fighting to survive. Still, when economic trust cracks, it leaves a mark. And money problems are rarely just about money. They reveal deeper fractures, confidence, loyalty, unity, and that leads us somewhere even more human. Because beyond coins and taxes, something was changing in the hearts of the people themselves. Money and politics were only part of the story. Let us step outside the cities for a moment, away from the marble, away from the Senate, out to the edges of the empire where the wind felt colder and the maps felt uncertain. Because while Rome was arguing about taxes and emperors, the world beyond its borders was changing. For centuries, Rome had managed its frontiers with a mix of military strength and smart diplomacy. The Rhine and the Danube rivers were not just natural boundaries, they were lines of tension. On the other side lived Germanic tribes, not barbarians in the cartoon sense, but complex societies with their own leaders, families and ambitions. Then in the late 4th century, something massive happened. Around the year 370, a fierce nomadic group known as the Huns moved westward from Central Asia. And when the Huns moved, other tribes moved too. It was like pushing the first domino in a long chain reaction. The Goths, pressured by the Huns, approached the Roman border asking for asylum. Yes, asylum. In the year 376, tens of thousands of Goths were allowed to cross the Danube into Roman territory. Historian Peter Heather estimates that the number may have reached over 100,000, including women and children. Now imagine being a Roman official at the border. You're already dealing with inflation, political chaos, military strain, and now entire populations are arriving at your doorstep desperate and armed. At first Rome tried to manage them, but corruption crept in. Roman officials reportedly exploited the Goths, even selling them dog meat at outrageous prices during a famine. That humiliation turned into anger, and anger turned into rebellion. In the year 378, at the Battle of Adrianople, the Roman army faced the Goths in open combat. The result shocked the empire. Emperor Valens himself was killed. A reigning Roman emperor died on the battlefield. It was one of the worst military defeats in Roman history. For the first time, the myth of Roman invincibility cracked in a very public way. But here is the deeper question. Was this invasion, or was it a failure of integration? Could Rome have absorbed these new populations differently? History is rarely black and white. And what makes this moment so powerful is that it was not a single explosion. It was pressure building over time, migration, fear, mismanagement, pride. Sound familiar? The empire was no longer just fighting enemies outside its walls. It was struggling to define who belonged inside them. And that identity crisis, that is where our story turns next. And just when Rome thought it had seen the worst, nature joined the story. Not with thunder and lightning, not with some dramatic scene from a movie, but with something invisible, disease. In the year 165, during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, a plague swept through the empire. We now call it the Antonine Plague. Ancient sources like the physician Galen described fevers, diarrhea, skin eruptions. Modern scholars believe it may have been smallpox. Historian Kyle Harper estimates it could have killed up to 5 million people. 5 million in a world without modern medicine. Imagine entire villages going silent. Legions weakened not by swords but by sickness. Tax revenue shrinking because fewer people were alive to pay it. And Rome was not done. In the mid-3rd century, another outbreak known as the Plague of Cyprian struck again. Bishop Cyprian of Carthage wrote about streets filled with the dying. Some historians estimate mortality rates of 10 to 15% in certain regions. Let me ask you something. How does a society handle back-to-back crises like that? Economic instability, political chaos, migration pressure, and then disease on top of it all. It changes people. Harper argues in The Fate of Rome that climate shifts during the late Roman period, including cooler temperatures and unpredictable harvests, made food supplies less reliable. Tree ring data and ice core samples suggest environmental stress during these centuries. Crops fail, prices rise, people panic. And when fear grows, unity weakens. Communities began turning inward. Wealthy elites retreated to fortified villas in the countryside. Urban life slowly lost its energy. Public works declined. The great baths and arenas that once symbolised civic pride became harder to maintain. It was not that Romans suddenly forgot how to build. It was that the resources, trust and confidence that once fueled those projects were fading. Here is the haunting part. None of these factors alone destroyed Rome. Not a single plague. Not one invasion. Not one bad emperor. It was the layering of crises, one wave after another, each one shaving a little more strength from the system. Have you ever noticed how in life it is rarely one big event that exhausts you? It is the accumulation, the constant pressure. By the early 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was running on fumes, and that is where we finally arrive at the moment everyone remembers, the sackings, the final emperor, the symbolic fall. But what actually happened in those last years? And was it truly the end? So here we are, after the plagues, after the inflation, after the migrations and the political chaos. What most of us remember as the fall is actually a handful of moments that felt symbolic, almost cinematic. In the year 410, the unthinkable happened. The city of Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths under King Alaric. For 800 years, no foreign enemy had captured the city. 800 years. When news spread across the Mediterranean, people were stunned. St. Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, said the city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. You can almost hear the disbelief in his words. And yet here is something surprising. The sack of 410 was not a total annihilation. The Visigoths looted, yes. They took gold, silver treasures. But they also spared many churches and didn't burn the city to the ground. Life continued. Rome was bruised, not erased. Then came the year 455. The Vandals arrived. Another sack. More humiliation. The psychological impact may have been even greater than the physical damage. Imagine growing up believing your city is eternal, only to watch it violated twice within a single lifetime. Still, the Western Roman Empire limped on. By this point, real power had shifted away from emperors and toward powerful generals. One of them, a Germanic commander named Odoacer, made a quiet but decisive move in the year 476. He deposed the young emperor Romulus Augustulus. And here is the part that feels almost anticlimactic. There was no massive final battle, no dramatic speech. Romulus Augustulus was simply removed from office and sent into retirement. Odoacer declared himself king of Italy and sent the imperial insignia to Constantinople. That was it. No explosion, just a transition. Historians later marked the year 476 as the official end of the Western Roman Empire. But if you had been alive at that moment, you might not have realised you were witnessing the fall of Rome. You would have just been living through another political shift. And that is the strange beauty of history. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly 1,000 more years. Roman law survived. Roman architecture survived. Even the idea of a senate survived in different forms. So let me ask you something. Did Rome truly fall, or did it transform? Because when we step back, we see something deeper than collapse. We see adaptation, fragmentation, rebirth. Empires may crumble, but ideas travel. And now, as we move into the final part of our story, it is time to ask the bigger question. What does Rome's long, complicated ending teach us about power, resilience, and the world we're living in today? So what do we actually do with all of this? Because it is easy to watch Rome's story like it is a documentary about someone else's world. Marble statues, Latin speeches, men in armour, very dramatic, very distant. But Rome is not just a story about the past, it is a story about patterns. When Edward Gibbon wrote in 1776 that Rome fell because of a gradual loss of civic virtue, he was writing during the age of revolutions. When modern historians like Peter Heather point to migration and military pressure, they are writing in a globalised world. When Kyle Harper talks about climate change and pandemic shaping Rome's fate, he is writing after we ourselves have lived through global disease outbreaks. Every generation looks at Rome and sees a mirror, and maybe that is why this story never goes out of style. Rome teaches us that power is not just about armies. At its height, Rome had around 30 legions, roughly 150,000 professional soldiers, not counting auxiliaries. It had engineering, brilliance, legal systems, trade networks connecting 3 continents. But what made Rome strong in the first place was not marble. It was cohesion, a shared belief in the system. When that belief weakens, when institutions become unstable, when inequality grows too wide, when crisis piles on top of crisis, even the strongest structure begins to wobble, not collapse overnight, just wobble. And here is the part I find strangely hopeful. Rome did not disappear into dust. Its legal code influenced the Justinian Code in the East. That code later shaped European civil law systems. Latin evolved into Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. Roman roads influenced medieval trade routes. The idea of a republic inspired political thinkers centuries later, including the architects of the United States Constitution. Even in falling, Rome was planting seeds. Is that not fascinating? Sometimes what feels like an ending is actually a transformation. If you lived in the year 476, you might have felt uncertainty, maybe fear. But you would not have known that monasteries would preserve ancient texts, that Renaissance artists would look back to Roman architecture, that 2,000 years later, millions of people would still be talking about your empire on something called the internet. History moves in cycles, growth, peak, strain, reinvention. And maybe the real lesson is not to fear decline, but to understand it. To recognise the early cracks, to value institutions, to strengthen community, to adapt instead of pretending everything is still marble and gold. Because no empire is truly eternal, but ideas can be. If you have stayed with me through this journey from the shining streets of ancient Rome to its quiet transformation, thank you. Truly. Your time is valuable, and I am honoured you spent these minutes here. If this story made you think, reflect, or even just see history a little differently, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear what moment struck you the most. And if you want more deep human stories like this, well, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what is coming next. Because our next journey will take us to another empire that once believed it was unshakable. And as you now know, that is always where the most interesting stories begin.